We're going to continue our series of messages on total fitness, on following God's wisdom in many different aspects and areas of our life. And we've been thinking about financial fitness in particular. And today I want to focus on financial planning. Planning is one of those things that can be pretty risky because we can make plans with certain attitudes. And one of those attitudes is confidence. And confidence isn't always bad, but it can be a little dangerous. Are you a better driver than average? This is a question that was asked of people in a survey, and it was found that the overwhelming majority of people believe that they are better drivers than average. This answer was given by people also who had just been in automobile accidents, and indeed was given by people who were lying in bed with serious injuries from automobile accidents. They are better drivers than average. We're all above average. When it comes to business ventures, people are optimistic. When people start a new business, 81% of them believe that their business will succeed. 1/3 of them are around after 5 years. So they're almost 3 times as likely to believe that their business will succeed as it is in actual statistics likely their business will succeed. So that can throw a monkey wrench into your planning. It is very disruptive of your planning when you consider yourself to be above average while making your plans, and when you consider your endeavors likely to succeed when they might not. The Bible says that one reason for that is simply pride. We have a higher opinion of ourselves generally than we ought, and we have assumptions about tomorrow that don't always hold true. And so the Bible warns those who have big plans about tomorrow, about their wealth, and about their business. It says, now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. That is the first thing that has to be said about financial planning, is that all planning is subject to if it is the Lord's will. Lord willing, I would like to pursue this. Lord willing, I would like to lay these plans for the future, but they are all subject to the fact that our life is very fragile. We don't know what will happen tomorrow, and that God has His plans. God has the final say. When you read the book of Proverbs, that comes through again and again. In his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. You can have your plans, you can have your course set out for you in your own mind, but God has His plans, and they are not always yours. A man's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand his own way? Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. That's echoed in the James passage we looked at earlier. You don't know what a day may bring forth. And with that knowledge of God in charge and of our uncertainty, we ought to be humble as we approach the whole process of planning and as we look ahead towards tomorrow. Jesus told the story of someone who was a good financial planner, and he was very skilled in making money and in accumulating money. In fact, he made so much money that he had to figure out where to put all of his assets, and he knew what he would do. I'm going to build bigger storehouses. I'm going to pile up even more, and I am going to live it up and relax. And I'm going to say, self, you have all that you need. You're going to be living just fabulously. He had planned it all. And God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be," says Jesus, "with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God." A proud person thinks more highly of himself than he ought to think, and he also just plain thinks about himself more than he ought and doesn't think about God nearly enough. He wants to be rich only in his own assets, but if he's poor towards God, and God says, "Tonight your soul is required of you," what then? So all of our planning has to be subject to God's change of plan, and we need to realize that money is not nearly so important as our relationship with God, as being right with God, and we need to be ready to meet God at any time if that should be God's plan for us. There's also a different kind of danger, though, than one of pride and going around strutting, thinking our plans are going to always come true. There can be worry and the fear that things are going to go wrong, or that my life is going to be ruined, and how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to do this? And you can fret and worry. And Jesus says, "I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air." And he says, "Look at the flowers. God takes care of them, and they're not nearly as valuable as you are. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to his life? And since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest?" In planning, if you're driven by an attitude of worry, it can lead to some bad decisions, but even if the decisions are good, it can make life very difficult, very hard for you to enjoy, and very dishonoring to God, because He's the one who has set the number of your days and who looks out for you. And so Jesus tells us, don't let worry be your motivation for planning and trying to be a control freak who has everything mapped out and always in control at all times. If you want to plan, you need the attitude of godly fear and godly faith when you're making your plans. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's the great antidote to pride, and it is certainly to be applied when it comes to making our plans. There is no wisdom, no insight, no plan that can succeed against the Lord. That ought to keep us humble and living in the fear of the Lord. Whatever we plan, it is not going to work out if it's against the Lord. And against worry, well, the antidote to worry is faith in God. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and your plans will succeed. They won't always turn out exactly the way you thought they would, but they will succeed. They'll succeed in the measure that God gives success to those plans. And so, fear of God and faith in God are the way to resist pride, the way to resist worry, and to plan with a clear head and a heart that's in tune with God. Now, having said all that, there are objections to planning, and one of those is maybe a theological objection, an objection based in your understanding of what the Bible teaches. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow, or in some older translations, take no thought of the morrow. And you say, take no thought of the morrow. That means don't even think about tomorrow. Don't make any plans whatsoever. God has got my future taken care of. I should trust Him. Isn't planning going against real faith and against real trust? Well, Jesus said, you should trust God for your food and clothing. Let me just ask a brief question. How many of you stood up this morning and went there like this and waited for your clothes to jump on your body? Didn't you trust God to clothe you? How many of you went down to the breakfast table and sat there and waited for the breakfast to leap onto the table and then make that jump into your mouth? Don't you trust God, people? I bet you grabbed that food and put it in your mouth. What a lack of faith. And yet people will use the similar reasoning to say, well, I certainly shouldn't be thinking ahead about money or making any plans because God's got it taken care of. Well, the Bible has some things to say about planning and thinking ahead. Jesus said, look at the birds and the flowers if you're too tempted to worry. But the Bible also says, look at the ant if you're a bonehead who never thinks ahead and isn't willing to work hard. Look at the ant. They store things up. So, misguided faith can be an excuse not to plan ahead. Another excuse isn't so Bible-centered or quite so pious. Finances, for many of us, aren't fun to think about. And we just don't want to bother with it. So we put it off, and we put it off, we put it off. I don't pay attention to finance. I'm busy with other things. Well, sometimes being busy with other things ends up being very busy with financial problems that could have been headed off if you addressed them sooner. And so neglect is not one of the world's great excuses. And closely related to that then is just laziness. Budgets are boring. I don't like studying personal finance. And you say, well, that's not laziness. I'm a hard worker. I get out there, I work hard. I give lots of effort, on things that you enjoy. But the moment you neglect something just because you happen not to like it all that much, the old-fashioned word for that is laziness, okay? It feels like work. And so you might just avoid doing it for those reasons. Not learning about finance and not planning ahead is bad theology, it's foolish neglect, and it's laziness. I know that I'm not being very polite, but sorry. If you're a person who wants to just leave the money matters alone and ignore them and hope the problems will go away and the good things will happen, well, here's what happens. I went past the field of the sluggard, the man who lacks judgment. Thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds. If you want your bank account filled with thorns and your bills with weeds, then neglect them. That's all it will take. Just neglect. Don't pay any attention. Don't do anything about it. This is true in almost every area of life. If you want it to go to pot, just ignore it for a while and it'll do just fine. The weeds and the thorns, they'll do great. Ever since Adam, if you don't want to put a little of the sweat of your brow into something, you can count on thorns and weeds. So if you want something that is better and to make better use of the finances and the resources God gives you, you need to plan. The plans of the diligent lead to prosperity as surely as haste leads to poverty. And here's again, go to the ant, consider its ways and be wise. It stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. The ant thinks ahead. You got the brains of an insect? Well, then think ahead. And another part of that is make plans by seeking advice. Many of us don't know what we don't know. And so if there are people who know financial matters better than you do and you need some input, talk to them. There's some good resources in writing. Be careful, of course, because some people who are giving advice are also make their living at it, and they may make their living in an honorable manner. They may make their living by only selling you the highest commission products because that's what makes them the most money, not what does you the most good. So you make plans by seeking advice, but you need to choose your advisors carefully as well. Well, when you're looking for advice, Personal Finance for Dummies is a book that's sold very well, millions of copies over the years. It comes out with a new edition every few years. Here's the basic advice. Spend less than you earn. Save what you don't spend. Invest what you save. Well, blow me over. Would you even pay the $15 for the book to get that advice? Well, some of you, if you followed those three things, would save yourself a lot more than $15. But of course, the point of the book is not just the simple advice, but how to do that. How do you spend less than you earn? How can you be a good saver who learns and practices thrift? And where do you invest? What's a good investment? That's a way of seeking advice, of going to a book, and there's other books by people who know their stuff. There's also, I tend to lean toward books anyway, but be a little careful on the internet about grabbing the first article you see, because sometimes the first article you see is sponsored by somebody who wants to sell you something. And sometimes when you're just looking at TV, some of the financial gurus on TV give very bad advice, but they look good on TV doing it. The first requirement to be on television is looking good. and sounding persuasive, okay? Just realize that. So be careful what advisors you pick. Here's just, I made some of these available in the back, not because I'm promoting a particular company or person. Doug has this kind of thing available that makes, that it just shows you a lot of the different areas to think about. You got to think about what are your income sources. You think about, lower down, you maybe can't even read it from there, but printouts are available if you want them. But strengthening your financial position, protecting against setbacks through various kinds of insurance, saving for your goals, thinking ahead to retirement, looking at your legacy, thinking about taxes throughout the whole trip because taxes are always a factor. One value of this is it gives you a lot of the things to think about in just one sheet. Am I looking at this area and thinking about it wisely? One of the areas is getting out of debt or dealing with the debts that you have. And we've looked at that in a previous message, so I'll just quickly mention put God first, tithe and pray, and have God as a financial partner. That's one of the keys to financial success. And when you have financial success, enjoying it with God's fellowship and rather than without it. Work hard and gain gradually. No get-rich-quick schemes. They will not get you out of debt. Budget to spend less than you earn. Have a budget if you're bad with money. Make yourself follow a budget. Build an emergency fund so that you don't have to borrow every time something comes up or something breaks down. Pay off your debt, and there's a couple of ways to do that, either in the order of the smallest balance, moving on up, because it always feels good to knock one off, and so sometimes you just start with the smallest balance of a debt so you can feel good about getting it done. If you're more mathematically oriented, go after the highest interest rate one first and pay it down. Avoid credit wherever you can. If you can buy a car, buy a used one with cash rather than a new one with credit. And then invest for future goals. Those were some of the things that we looked at when we thought about dealing with debt. Taxes. When you're doing financial planning, you better plan on taxes. The tax man cometh. Give to everyone what you owe them. Pay your taxes and government fees to those who collect them. And so you can't be a liar and a thief by refusing to pay taxes that you're required by law to pay. But when you're making decisions, remember the tax factor. If you're buying property, you're buying a house, you don't just have to think about the value of the house or the values in the neighborhood. Think about the taxes, because the taxes on your property might cost you as much or more than the mortgage. So you got to think about taxes when it comes to property tax. Sales tax. If you buy a 3-year-old car privately, you'll pay about $170 of sales tax. If you buy a new car, you pay $3,000 of tax. So again, I'm not saying never buy new. I'm saying when you buy something, think not just about that price tag you see, but about the taxes that are there. When it comes to income tax, there are various laws, and it's impossible to keep on. Have you ever seen how fat the books are of government laws on taxes? You can't keep track of it all. So sometimes you will want somebody who knows that stuff or get the right kind of software. But again, when you're investing, there are certain kinds of accounts that are tax advantaged. And you are not required by law to pay taxes that you're not required to pay. So know where the tax breaks are, know what kinds of investments are not going to kill you on taxes. Because again, you can just look at what's this fund returning in terms of percentage, but how much of a bite are the taxes taking out of it? You have to figure the taxes in, and if you're a person who's going to leave behind a sizable inheritance, not all of us are, but if somebody is, you certainly have to think about the taxes there, or the government will get more of it than the people you're leaving your property to. In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. Benjamin Franklin. Now, it's wise to prepare for some things that are possible but not certain. Okay, there's a lot of things you don't know for sure if they're going to happen, but you kind of want to be ready just in case they do. But here's a news flash. It's absolutely necessary to prepare for things that are absolutely certain, and it doesn't get a lot more certain than death and taxes. Here are some foreseeable facts. You will either get old or die young unless Jesus comes in your lifetime. Okay, those are your options. You're going to get old or you're going to die young. Now let us think about that. If you get too old for a job, will you be able to pay for your needs. You will be able to if you save and invest for retirement. If you die young, on the other hand, will those whom you leave behind be able to pay for their needs? If you're a child and your parents are paying all of your bills, yeah, they will be heartbroken if you were to die young, but it won't affect their financial position necessarily. But if you're a parent and you've got children, or if you've got other people who depend on you, are they going to be able to do okay if you're not there to pay the bills? Well, if not, then buy life insurance and make a will. Again, this is just so obvious. Death and taxes. These are things that you will face, and you better be ready for them. So, I'm not going to dwell on it. Do you have a will if you're a parent or if you're somebody who has any property at all? You should. And one of the first things you ought to do when you get out of here is find out how to get one, okay? If you have no life insurance, you say, well, why would I get life insurance? I mean, I'm trusting God to care for my offspring. Well, the Bible says somebody who doesn't even look after his own relatives has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. You know, that's in a little different context, but it's the similar principle. There it's talking about kids needing to look after their parents. But parents who take no thought of their little children and what would happen to them if I died when there are options available to provide for them. Hey, for a couple $100, you could have $500,000 or $1 million of life insurance for your children if you were to die. So are you going to say, oh, I'm just going to trust it to God that if I die, they and my other spouse will pay their way? Well, again, you have to decide whether that's something that you ought to do. You don't know what a day will bring forth. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. Proverbs says, and says twice, a prudent man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. If you see things coming and you don't take measures, you're not being godly and trusting. You're being foolish. Here's the motto of the simpleton. Come, each one cries, let me get wine. Let us drink our fill of beer, and tomorrow will be like today or even far better. That's the way drunks talk. That tomorrow is just going to automatically be pretty much like today unless it's better than today. I don't advise doing your financial planning while drunk or doing much of anything while drunk, because drunkenness is the behavior that characterizes those who aren't part of the kingdom of God. You got to prepare for problems because you don't know what will happen tomorrow, but you know that we live in a broken world with flawed and weak bodies. So, you got to realize that sometimes there's going to be medical costs if you get injured or if you get sick. If you own property, what if somebody gets hurt on your property? What if your house burns down? Then what? What if you're in a car wreck and somebody else is injured? Who's going to pay for it if you get sued? Who's going to buy you the new car when the car is wrecked? If you get disabled, you get hurt on the job, or you have a debilitating illness and you lose your ability to make an income, then what? If the provider of the family dies, who's going to provide for the survivors? Those are the kind of things that are going to happen to some of us, and maybe to all of us eventually to some degree or another. That's why insurance was invented. And insurance is a way of spreading risk, of pooling risk, so that if something bad happens to one person, then what others are giving can help fund their difficulty. There's also, at least for health insurance, Christian cost-sharing ministries, which do something kind of similar to insurance in that when one member of the ministry gets sick, then others help to pay for their treatment and for their health costs. So, there may be those who want to say, well, we don't believe in insurance. We believe that's contrary to God's teaching. And I would say, well, which teaching? Because God's teaching says you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. God's teaching says that the prudent look ahead, and when they see danger coming, they do something about it. you can plan on your life having its share of problems. So store up some money to face those problems when you can, and pool some money with others where you share the risk with them through insurance or through a Christian ministry that helps to do that. Otherwise, when you don't know what happens tomorrow, I can guarantee you the business plan's not always going to work. Your health is not always going to remain constant. Even though you are one of those fabulous, superior drivers, you might have an accident. It will surely be somebody else's fault, but you might have an accident. And so, these things happen. We need to be prepared for them financially. And then when we've faced up to the challenges that can come our way and have taken at least prudent measures to the degree that we're able to be prepared for them, then there's also the matter of investing. And again, if you save, you do need to invest. And if you save and you want to do certain things in life, you will either need to go into debt to do them, or you will need to save and invest in order to do them. If you want to buy a home, you'll need to save up enough to make a down payment. If you want to start a business, you'll either need to save up money to do it, or you'll need to borrow to do it. If your children are going to be educated without going way into debt, you would need something to help them with that, or they would need to work in order to earn something. If you want to fund good causes in the future, you need to have something that you can write the checks on. You can't fund good causes if you have nothing to fund them with. So you need to be able to save and invest if you want to fund good causes, mission causes, charities, people who have needs. If you want to fund your retirement or an inheritance, you do need to invest. And as you look at these are not the same thing. Sometimes you have a short-term goal. You say, in 2 years I want to be able to buy a house. And I'm going to need this size down payment to do that, so I'm going to save money for that. Don't throw that money in the stock market, because that can go down a long ways in a year or two. Short-term needs need to be saved in stuff that is stable over the short term, where there's a lower risk, there's a lower return, but it's likely to be there in a year or two. If you've got a longer time frame, you're looking at retirement, and you're 30. Well, retirement's 35 years away. The stock market goes up and down, but over time it tends to go up. So for a long-term need, you can invest in something that has a higher risk, but also a way higher return over the long term. Do you want to take any of those risks? Well, Ecclesiastes 11 is a chapter of the Bible that talks about risk in the first several verses. It says, whoever watches the wind will not plant. Whoever looks at the clouds will not reap. If you're a farmer and you're always looking at the weather report, it's good to look at the weather report. But if you never do anything, if you say, I'm not going to plant unless I have a guarantee that there's going to be no hail for the next 3 months, and I'm not going to plant anything unless I know for sure that for the next 4 months we're going to get enough rain, well, then you're not going to plant, because there's always a risk for a farmer. And this is true of every kind of investing. If you want an absolute guarantee that it's always going to work out your way, you're never going to do anything. So what do you do then? Well, sow your seed in the morning and at evening. Let not your hands be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, or whether both will do equally well. When there is uncertainty, that doesn't mean do nothing. That means keep at it and keep doing what you need to do. Invest your work, invest your property. And as you do that, you need to do it wisely. Ecclesiastes says, cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you'll find it again. You cast your bread on the waters is send out a ship. You send out a ship with grain, and after a while the merchants will come back, and you'll have a return on your investment, unless the ship goes down. But you venture, because nothing ventured, nothing gained. But then Ecclesiastes also says, though you've got to take the risk, give portions to 7, yes to 8, for you don't know what disaster may come upon the land. You don't know which kind of disaster will come, but if you don't have all your eggs in one basket, if you diversify, then you're not going to lose everything if one investment goes bad, but 7 others are okay. So you dare to invest, and yet you diversify to reduce your risk. You invest in low risk for short-term goals, like I said. You put it in cash, a savings account or a money market account if you're saving for something for the next year or two. If you want a higher return and it's a longer term, then bonds, stocks, international stocks, that's an increasing level of risk. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just saying that short-term saving means low-risk investing. Long-term investing, where you don't need the money for 20 years, then you can take the higher risk because despite the ups and downs, overall it'll have a higher return. When you dare and when you diversify, you spread the risk, you seek the reward among various kinds of assets since you don't know what will perform best. Now in our time, there's a variety of ways to do this. Cash, it's not going to lose value. It's not going to gain value very fast either. Stock, bonds, international stock, each has their own risks, each has their own rate of return. One way to diversify that exists today is you can invest not in this stock of this company and say, I want to own Apple and invest all in one stock. Well, that works great if it goes up, 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 up. It works terrible if it goes down, 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 down. A mutual fund puts investment in a lot of different companies. A total index fund means it invests in every company in the country or every company in the world. So your investment actually gets divvied up among all those different companies, and that is called diversification. It means that you don't have everything in one company. By the way, some of you who work for a company, you maybe already know that, it's a very bad idea to have your main nest egg be that company's stock. Because if that company goes bad, not only do you lose your income, but your savings go. So, again, diversify. One way, again, without giving much advice on the subject, but many of us don't want to be thinking about finances too much, do we? I don't. I don't know about you. If you want to really be simple on the investment thing when it comes to retirement, just let somebody else do the thinking for you. Choose a retirement date index fund. If you're 30 years from retirement, choose a date for, 2045 or 2050. And they'll put it in funds that are the appropriate mix of stocks and bonds. They'll do most of the thinking for you, the good companies will, and they'll do it better than you would, okay? They also won't panic like you will. That's one of the worst things you can do is you see the stock market go down, you say, I got to get out of stocks. This is called selling low. When the stock market skyrockets, you say, I got to get into that, I'm missing out. That's called buying high. Selling low, buying high is a fabulous way to lose money. You need to not follow your emotions or follow the latest fluctuation when you're doing that. So to just invest in something where the date is automatically adjusted to the risk factor for your age, that gives you maximum diversification, it gives you an appropriate level of risk, and it gives you, as I said already, freedom from fuss, where you're not checking your finances every day. You've made a good decision, now you just stick with it and let the fund take care of itself. Some people say, well, investing is pretty much like gambling. And some people think that gambling is good, so that's not a problem. Others think gambling is bad, but that investing is bad too, and they're pretty much the same thing. Well, they are similar in this respect. Both involve risk. And that's about where the similarity ends. Because there is stupid risk and there's smart risk. There is rational risk and there is rotten risk. Investing means that your wealth grows if others flourish. If you invest in a stock index fund, let's say, the only way that thing goes up is if the companies are doing well and providing products people need and are operating efficiently and making a profit. And if the economy is doing well and other people are doing well, congratulations, so are you. How does gambling work? You take money from other people. If you win, they lose. Here's the good news: if you don't want to feel guilty, you're probably going to lose and they're going to win. Okay, so if you don't want to be burdened by guilt in gambling and ripping other people off, here's the good news. You're the one getting ripped off, almost always. Gambling, when government sponsors it, is a tax on people who are bad at math. Lotteries are a tax on people who are very bad at math. That's what they are. They promise, that's the attraction of gambling. I win, somebody else loses, it was easy. There's a huge difference between investing where you profit if other people are profiting, but gambling is, the only way gambling will make you money is if it's taken directly from somebody else's pocket, and usually your pockets are going to be the empty ones. Investing aims for gradual growth in wealth. Gambling aims for instant wealth. The Bible says that people who want to get rich quick, those get-rich-quick schemes fail, but the one who gathers money little by little makes it grow. Investing is very likely to make you richer over the long term. Gambling is almost certain to make you poorer. In fact, even if you win, you're likely to end up poorer. The lottery winners, the ones who get the millions, wind up with almost nothing in the majority of the cases a few years later. That's just the fact. Even if you win, you somehow lose. So to say that investing and gambling are the same thing betrays a very serious lack of clear thinking and of understanding what's going on with the two. Here's a few of the great investors of our time. I'll just give you a few proverbs from them. I've said before that you want to direct your life by God's wisdom, by the wisdom of the Bible, but wisdom itself encourages us to pay close attention to those who really know the area of what they're talking about. Warren Buffett is a legendary investor. Just a few proverbs from him. If you aren't willing to own a stock for 10 years, don't even think about owning it for 10 minutes. Because he doesn't like day trading. Day trade, if you ask people who buy and sell stocks by the day, that is closer to gambling. He's saying if a company's not worth buying over the long haul, it ain't worth buying. Somebody's sitting in the shade today because someone planted a tree a long time ago. If you want to sit in the shade of a tree, you might have to plant it and then wait about 10 or 20 years for it to really grow. I'm always struck by how old I am when I look out my window, because I can remember when we moved into that house 15 years ago and the trees were like this, and now they are huge. But that's a principle not just for trees, but for investing as well, that over the course of time, you need to be able to think ahead. He also says predicting rain doesn't count. Building arks does. You could go out from this message even and say, well, here's a good principle, and here's a nice thought. Yeah, did you do anything about it? You heard him say, yeah, you need a will, or you ought to have an investment plan, or you ought to save. And you say, yeah, I agree. That leads to a good financial forecast overall. But forecasting isn't what you need to do. You actually need to put your money where your mouth is. You actually need to build some arks. John Bogle, the founder of the Vanguard Fund, the largest mutual fund company in the world, has a few sayings that I'll just share. If you have trouble imagining a 20% loss in the stock market, you shouldn't be in stocks. Because if you're young especially, you say, hey, the stock's been going up the last 8 years. Man, I got to get in stocks. And yeah, you weren't around when they went. So they can go down far and fast. And if you can't imagine that, and if you can't live with that, then you better not invest in them. Bogle says, don't look for the needle in the haystack, just buy the haystack. He's the pioneer of index investing, which just says, hey, buy a little of the whole stock market. And he invented the index funds that do that. So just buy the whole haystack. You're not going to be able, you and I are not going to outguess the great financial minds as to picking the individual stocks. So you better just buy the haystack. He had a bet, by the way, a few years ago with experts in hedge fund investing. And he said, these hedge fund managers, they charge a lot because they're supposed to know so much. And they're going to know when the markets go down, and they're going to know when the markets go up, and they're going to protect you against that, and you're going to pay them quite a bit of money to do that. And so he put out a challenge to any hedge fund manager who wanted, I will simply invest in an index fund that follows the market on all the companies, and you do your thing with it. Other companies you think are going to go up, and you're going to go down. This was Warren Buffett who made this bet, and they took him up on it, and the index fund wiped out the hedge fund experts. It gained far, far more because, sorry to say, there really are almost no experts who can, by the office costs and everything else they do, the cost they add will wipe out the gains you would have made. And so another of Bogle's sayings, the miracle of compounding returns has been overwhelmed by the tyranny of compounding costs. Now that's a mouthful. Basically, he was saying, if guys are charging you a bunch of money to manage your money, then most of the return they make is going to them, not you. So you want to get low-cost funds, ones that charge just a minuscule amount to have your money rather than the ones that charge you 1 or 2% a year. Time is your friend. Impulse is your enemy. Yeah, impulse is to sell when it's going down and to buy when it's going up, which is exactly the wrong strategy. To invest with success, you must be a long-term investor. And this one I really like because it's in the spirit of Proverbs. Learn every day, but especially from the experiences of others. It's cheaper. You can learn from your own bitter financial experience, but that gets pretty pricey. So again, there's a lot of areas to think about when you're doing your financial planning, but don't plan on tomorrow automatically being better than today. Don't plan on your expert driving and your financial genius being just the thing that's going to carry you. You do actually have to pay attention to the various aspects of finance, and then you also have to keep this in mind. This is one part of our life and not the most important part by a long shot. Jesus said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Now, this is not saying you should never have any investment or even think about money, but if that is your treasure, if that is your source of security, if that is what you value most, and if that is what you expect to last forever, you are in for a very big disappointment. Markets crash, things lose their value. The world itself is going to come to an end. I mentioned death and taxes as a certainty, but Jesus' return and the making of a new heaven and a new earth is the absolute certainty. And so if we're thinking about, well, I need to be ready for retirement. Well, maybe you do need to be ready for retirement. But are you ready for Judgment Day? That is more certain than retirement. And what comes after lasts a lot longer than your few retirement years do. And so as we think about financial planning, we need to realize that finance, though an important area of stewardship that God gives us as believers, is always secondary to Jesus Christ. And Jesus said the one who discovers the kingdom of God is like somebody who finds treasure hidden in a field. And they would sell everything they got to buy that field just to get that treasure. And so it is with relation to our finances. There may be a time when God calls you in His plan to give up your financial well-being, to make huge sacrifices to serve Him. And when it comes to the choice between God and money, there should be no debate at all. You can't serve two masters. You either hate the one and love the other, or devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money, says Jesus. You serve God, you manage money, and do it wisely under God's guidance, but always with God supreme in your life. So I'd ask you again today, first of all, are you investing in eternity? Are you ready for the night when God says your soul is required of you? You need to be ready for that day. And then are you also ready for next week if He doesn't call you home? Are you ready to manage the money He gives you wisely? We need to be ready to die and be with Christ. We need to be ready to live for Christ and manage our finances responsibly in light of what His Word teaches us. Let's pray together.